Hello and welcome back. Now we're going to dive into some pretty deep philosophy. This, as you can see from this, what is truth? The place of argument in contemporary life. So, what is truth is not asking, it's not the same thing as asking what is true. Like, as I record this, it is 3:50 p.m. That is true. That's just a verifiable fact. What is truth, capital T truth, is a philosophical question. Is there an objective truth that we can seek out and find, like a set of rules that everyone should obey, that is set in stone, and everyone should follow the same set of rules? Or is truth more fluid, more transitory? Is it something that changes from culture to culture? Something that is considered right and good and expected in American culture might not be in, say, German culture or Russian culture or Japanese culture. So this pair of pages seeks to ask the question, what is truth? And it follows, it builds on the stuff that's been read so far. So we're going to continue talking about Socrates and Callicles. And it gets real dense, so I'm going to try to pause and explain what they mean. Just know that I had to read this a couple times myself to really understand the argument they were making. It's definitely college level. Okay. Although the debate between Socrates and Callicles appears to end inconclusively, many readers over the centuries conceded the victory to Socrates almost by default. Callicles was seen as cheating. Sophistry, for good reasons, was synonymous with trickery in argument. The moral relativism of this. Okay, so let me start with trickery in argument. That if you've ever argued with somebody who traps you in little corners with their words, you'll know what they mean by trickery in argument. Where they're like, but you said you like killing babies. And you're like, I never said that. And they're like, well, you said X and Y, which leads to the inevitable conclusion that you like killing people. And you're like, that I don't see how you got there. That's trickery in argument. They're putting words in your mouth. They're leading you down false pathways. The moral relativism. Moral relativism is there's moral objectivism and moral relativism. Moral objectivism is what I was talking about before, where is there one set of rules that everyone should follow, or moral relativism is the idea that morals change from person to person, from culture to culture. The moral relativism of the sophists was so repugnant to most people that they refused to concede that the sophist position might have some merits, or that their methodology might be turned to other ends. In our century, however, the sophists have found a more sympathetic readership, one that takes some of the questions they raised quite seriously. Indeed, the fact that the sophists are no longer dismissed out of hand is evidence of the shift away from a Platonic world where there was a single knowable capital T truth attainable by rational means. One way of tracing this shift in attitude toward truth is by looking at a significant shift in the definition of the verb to argue over the centuries. We have already mentioned that one early meaning of to argue was to clarify. Another early meaning was to prove. Argument was closely associated with demonstrations of the sort you see in math classes, where you move from axioms to proofs through formula. If you've done geometry, if an isosceles triangle has two equal angles, and then that must mean that, or if this triangle has two equal angles and a third angle that is unequal, this triangle must be isosceles. Something like that, right? It's a proof. It takes knowable facts and puts them together to prove something. An argument of this sort is virtually irrefutable, unless we play Callicles and reject the axioms. An axiom is a simple truth, kind of like a argumentative syllogism. It's just an axiom is something that is inarguably true. And unless somebody just rejects it out of hand, like you start off by saying, well, we know that 2 plus 2 equals 4. And then Callicles comes in and says, do we? Does 2 plus 2 equal 4? Well, if you're not even going to agree on that, it's impossible to argue with this person. Okay, today, on the other hand, to argue is usually taken to mean something like to provide grounds for inferring. Instead of demonstrating some pre-existing truth, an argument can hope only to make an audience more likely to agree with its conclusions. The better the argument, the better grounds one provides. The more likely the audience will infer what the arguer has inferred. Infer, if you don't know, means the opposite of imply. If I imply something, that means I'm trying to get you to think it without overtly saying it. Like if I say, oh man, what's a good example? If I say, that's a nice shirt you're wearing, the thing I said is that your shirt is nice. The thing I'm implying is that you have good taste, right? But on the other end of it, if you hear you have good taste, you have inferred it. You have taken in information that wasn't explicitly said. The better the argument, the better the grounds one provide, the more likely the audience will infer or assume what the arguer has inferred. That actually should be say implied. The audience will infer what the arguer has implied. One contemporary philosopher says that argument can hope only to increase adherence to ideas, not absolutely convince an audience of the necessary truth of those ideas. In the 20th century, absolute demonstrable truth is seen by many thinkers, from physicists to philosophers, as an illusion. Some would argue that truth is merely a product of human beings talking and arguing with each other. These thinkers say that with regard to questions of interpretation, meaning, or value, one can never tell for certain whether an assertion is true, not by examining the physical universe more closely, nor by reasoning one's way towards some Platonic form, nor by receiving a mystical revelation. The closest one can come to truth is through the confirmation of one's views from others in a community of peers. Okay, so something happened between Socrates and today, the 20th century. Well, now we're in the 21st century. But the thing that happened was called Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. And it was a scientist named Heisenberg who discovered that if you zoom in close enough to matter and you get down to the atom, then you can measure where the atom is in a single instant, or you can measure how fast the atom is moving. But you cannot measure both at the same time. If you freeze it in an instant to see where it is, it's not moving. And if it's moving, you can't freeze it, right? So you can either know how fast it's going or where it is, but you cannot know both. So that is the idea of the uncertainty of truth. You can't know everything about something, therefore you can't know anything. Again, all of this is arguable. You could argue with me if you wanted. Truth in any field of knowledge, say these thinkers, is simply an agreement of experts in that field. So that what is true in one time, say 1990, can be not true anymore by the time we get to 2020. As you can see, the world depicted by many 20th century thinkers, although it is certainly different from the world depicted by Callicles, has some important similarities to the sophists' worldview. Whatever else we may say about it, it is a world in which we look toward our social groups more than toward the world of objects to test their beliefs and ideas. To illustrate the relevance of Callicles to contemporary society, suppose for the moment that we wanted to ask whether sexual fidelity, okay, so sexual fidelity is loyalty. That's, if you have a partner, you're going to stay with just that partner and not cheat. That's what sexual fidelity is. A Socratic approach would assume a single real truth about the value of sexual fidelity, one that could be discovered through a gradual peeling away of wrong answers. Callicles' approach would assume that the value of sexual fidelity is culturally relative. So Callicles would point out all the societies in which monogamous fidelity for one or both sexes is not the norm. So what he would do is he would find societies and raise them as an example and say people aren't monogamous in this society or that society. People sleep around a lot over in that one or this one. And he'd say, so therefore, there's no such thing as an objective truth about sexual fidelity. Clearly, our world is more like Callicles'. We are all exposed to multiple cultural perspectives directly and indirectly. Through TV, newspapers, travel, and education, we experience ways of thinking and valuing that are different from our own. It is difficult to ignore the fact that our personal values are not universally shared or even respected. Thus, we're all faced with the need to justify our ideas in such a diverse society. Diverse society, later on in the next couple of pages, they start to refer to that as a pluralistic society. Plural, like meaning singular and plural. So pluralistic is a society with a bunch of different viewpoints in it. For class discussion, I'm not entirely sure if I want to do this as class discussion because it's a pretty dark topic. On any given day, newspapers provide evidence of the complexity of living in a pluralistic culture. Issues that could be readily decided in a completely homogeneous culture, homogeneous meaning everyone is all the same. So if everyone was German, or everyone was Ethiopian, or everyone was Caribbean, then it would be homogeneous. But there is almost no such thing as a homogeneous culture anymore. France does a good job of sort of homogenizing its culture and saying that this counts as French and that does not count as French. China does it too. But most countries are pretty diverse. Let's see here. Where was I? Issues that could be readily decided in a completely homogeneous culture raise many questions for us in a society that has so few shared assumptions. Consider the difficulties of sorting out the following value questions. In the fall of 1985, a Japanese woman in California was charged with first-degree murder of her 2 children. The woman allegedly walked into the surf with the youngsters in an attempt at parent-child suicide. The children died. The mother lived. According to news accounts, in Japan, parent-child suicide happens almost daily. They call it oyako shinju, and a parent who survives is rarely prosecuted. I did a little research on this, by the way, and that assertion that child suicide happens almost daily, or parent-child suicide happens almost daily, is a crazy exaggeration. It is not that common. It happens, and they do have that word for it, but just because they have a word for it doesn't mean it's that common. If it was that common, there wouldn't be anybody left. If people were dying that much by parent-child suicide, anyway, moving on. The mother had lived under the Japanese value system, where her life had been centered on her husband and children. She was a good Japanese mother, even an overprotective mother by American standards, worrying over the children's most minor colds and sniffles. The crisis arose when her husband abandoned the family, thereby taking away not only their material support, but also their honor. The parent-child suicide followed the dictates of Japanese values and traditions. Working in small groups, try to recreate arguments for both the prosecution and the defense of the mother if time permits. We're not going to do that. I don't know what I'm going to do for this as I record this video. I'll figure it out after I stop recording. But we do need to discuss this idea of what is truth. Okay, goodbye for now.